And give it a second. I just messaged Director Chesak and Director Borthwick. And give it a second. We have anybody in the waiting room or we're good? We have enough for a quorum, yeah? 2, 3, 4. Okay. All right, so I guess everybody else that's coming in will come in. Hold on.
Okay, we're good to go.
Director Borthwick's coming. He thought it was at 7. And there's Director Chesak. So we will begin.
Okay.
Give me a second. I call to order the Budget and Finance Committee meeting for Monday, January 22nd. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States
of the United States of America,
the Republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jenny, roll call.
Mr. Borthwick is on his way.
Yep.
Mr. Casey,
here.
Mrs. Chesak,
Present.
Ms. Fox is on her way, I believe. Ms. Martin,
Present.
Mr. McAndrew is on his way. Ms. Merkel,
Present.
Mrs. Gianni,
Present.
Mr. Holmes.
Present.
6 present.
Thank you.
Thank
I will
you.
now turn this over to Director Gilmartin, Budget and Chair, Finance Committee Chair.
Thank you, President Holmes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us, and welcome to Dr. Carrera and Dr. Saylor. Thank you for joining us this evening. I am going to rely heavily on our participants this evening, our guests, to walk us through much of this agenda. But by way of introduction, Dr. Carrera, would you introduce yourself to the group, please?
Sure, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Deborah Carrera. I am Special Advisor to the Secretary of Education. Prior coming to PDE, I spent 27 years working for the School District of Philadelphia.
Thank you, Dr. Carrera. And Dr. Saylor, I know everyone here knows you pretty well at this point. So I will turn this discussion over to you, and I know you'll have support from Dr. Carrera as well. One of the first things I wanted to discuss this evening is the status of the monitoring phase. As we're all aware, we passed our budget on December 18th, and we did not include the 1.25% tax increase that was indicated. And we received correspondence updating us on how that impacts our position in the recovery and now monitoring phase. And I was just wondering if you both would share your insights on that.
I will defer to Dr. Carrera.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for the invitation. And as you shared, we know that Scranton is in the monitoring phase of the actual recovery process. And that in this phase, PDE and the CRO, we just continue to work with the district to provide the district with regular progress on the implementation of the recovery plan, knowing that you're in monitoring for 5 years. And I do want to start off with saying that Scranton has been doing some really great work. We did have recently Interim Superintendent Laffey share some of the great accomplishments that the district is making as far as data. And as I've been looking at your data as well, great growth in grades 3 to 8. You've been doing great work in 8th grade science. So we're really seeing that the district is making growth in a positive way. And also I know that PFM is going to share their report in a little bit as well. But we're also excited that the district has maintained a positive fund balance of at least 5% of their annual revenues for 2 successive years. And so all of these supports that PD has provided through PFM, through the CRO, to really just support the district in ensuring that the district is implementing the plan that the district created. So when PDE allowed Scranton to exit recovery, it was based on the plan, the recovery plan that the district submitted. And that plan was a plan that actually has goals and action steps that the district is going to take and is going to continue to take to ensure that the district is on the right path to financial recovery, sustainability, and the academic growth that we're seeing as well.
Thank you, Dr. Carrera. So I guess certainly if my colleagues have any question, I'm happy to have them ask. And we work in a committee structure here. As you may know, there are 3 members of the Budget and Finance Committee, but we do operate in that any of the directors are certainly welcome to pose a question. I guess my question would be, first of all, well, my statement first would be thank you for acknowledging the hard work that has been done. I agree we've made some great strides, and I'm really appreciate your acknowledging that, and I'm grateful for the support that PDE has lent to the district in the form of PFM and both of our recovery officers and many resources that I know have been available to our administration. I guess my question to you would be, given that the district did not choose, or the board did not choose to implement that tax increase this year, how does that affect our status in the monitoring phase? I know that because of some good choices and some good luck as well in the past several years, we are in a position to weather that. And certainly as Ian and Bree talk through the 5-year projections and the implications that choice will have, I understand that at this moment we are in a somewhat solid place, but just broadly in terms of making those choices, how does PDE view that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important question to ask, right? Because like you just stated, like right now, the district is doing well. But when you look at the projections that PFM has provided as this plan was developed, the implications that the district and the goals that the district sets. I just want to make sure that these are the goals that the district set, that they would raise taxes, right? So that the district would have to raise taxes within the next 5 years. But then we also know that there's all this BEF stuff that's happening, right? And so I can't speak to what's going to happen a few months from now. So let's just speak about the moment. So right now for this year, we're fine, but we have to make sure that we're implementing those action steps that are in that recovery plan, unless there is a change, right? And that is a legislative change. That is General Assembly, Governor. That's we'll talk about that later. How the Basic Education Fund Committee, submitted recommendations, and that those recommendations are above PDE. Those recommendations are legislative actions that the General Assembly and the governor have to look at those recommendations and decide what are they going to do. So that's where we are now. So I want to be very careful of what we're saying, but there's a plan. The plan has goals that were set, and we want to make sure that the district is following those goals.
And I think, Dr. Carrera, you brought to mind an important distinction that I think needs to be drawn, and I think we need to constantly revisit so that we do have that understanding between the jurisdiction that belongs to PDE and where the legislature comes in to all of this, because I think there is sometimes a misconception about how some of that funding flows, and how, I think your focus on the plan and the goals from PDE's perspective is so important, but then of course that funding piece is not within your control.
Yeah, we are not a legislative body, and that's really important to understand, that we are, PDE we will implement, and again, Act 141 was legislated in 2012, and that's the current law now. And so our job is to adhere to the law.
And Thank you, because I know that there has been frustration throughout this process, and I'm sure we would all be happy to debate the pros and cons and
Yeah.
the merits and the challenges of the recovery process, but it is, as you said, established law.
And I've been to Scranton twice, and I've walked through the schools, and I want to again echo the incredible work that the staff and the students are doing. I enjoyed my last visit. We went to visit some of the elementary schools. I went to the high school. Kids are learning. Kids are being challenged. I've met with your district office. I met with your curriculum folks. We actually had your cyber administrator present today to all of the other pros and receivers because of the excellent program that you have with the Scranton Cyber School. So Mr. Budka came and presented, and people thought it was people walked away with great information. So Scranton is doing an amazing job. And we at PD, we just want to continue to support you and to make sure that you are that you stay on that pathway and that trajectory.
Thank you. And this may be a more technical question, so maybe Dr. Saylor, this is more appropriate to you. But when we look at that at amended recovery plan and the goals that were established when we exited, and we see those tax increases, certainly any other funding sources that come to be a reality are something we can bring into those discussions. But also, when we are looking at passing those structurally balanced budgets, if we come to realize that we do not have the support from the board to consider tax increases, if we are cutting expenses to maintain that structurally balanced budget, does that leave us in compliance with the recovery plan?
I think that's pretty simple. And Deb, you can jump in here. Structurally balanced, as defined in your plan, means current revenue meets current expenses. So if your current revenue doesn't meet expenses, then you cut expenses. So to answer your question, sure, that would be the logical way to balance at that point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Dr. Saylor just said.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, I think it's when you talk about the accomplishments and the growths and programs that have been established and grown, I certainly wouldn't want to see us go down that path. I'd like to look at all of the ways we can support the things we'd like to continue to do. And from time to time, that will mean looking for taxpayer support among many, many other options. But I think it is good to know that if there is not an appetite for that, there are other ways to comply. Thank you.
Pat, I have a question. Pat, payroll, since we didn't fill those positions, we've had what? How many pay periods did we have in the year 2024 thus far? Is it 2?
I believe 2, Tom. Yes.
Okay, so with one pay period, with all those unfilled positions, about how much money did we save in terms of both payroll, benefits, that kind of thing? You can guesstimate.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I don't have that exact number in front of us. We do know that for some of the higher level positions, like your assistant superintendent, your cyber VP, we had a total of about $318,000 budgeted for it. So, just in those 2 positions alone, you saved, 2 payrolls out of an annual 26. So, I mean, it's not insignificant. With each passing payroll, you also have a vacant, obviously full-time superintendent as well, a salary that's fully budgeted for. So there are certainly savings associated with the vacancies that are there. It's something that I can certainly get more specific on if you'd like.
No, I appreciate that. My underlying point here is that cost savings and then cost cutting are 2 different things. So we were able to look at the budget and find savings.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues? Good. I will.
I think I have one quick thing, Mr. Laffey. So, and yes, we did have some great savings, but I think going forward for a lot of these things, we have to find more sustainable savings, correct? Because a lot of the taxes are compounding going forward in these projections, correct? Like what we're looking at with these these savings, they're still projected out once we do fill the position. So we would have to find something to a revenue stream to either cover that because of the compounding. Like we don't raise the taxes this year. Next year, if we, since we didn't, we have to find the gap going forward for every year because they're compounding, correct?
That,
So
yeah,
that
that is correct. Yeah, what we have right now are some reductions in expenses that are, like, in theory, one time, unless you completely permanently eliminate the position from the budget. But if we have intended to fill these positions, which we certainly as the administration would not have included them in the budget proposal if we didn't think that they were valuable. But you are correct. The tax increase, once it's not levied, it's kind of gone forever, right? And it can't be, you never get that back because we are limited by what the Act 1 index is. But you are correct; those tax revenues do compound annually, and as your millage grows, when you apply a percentage increase to that growth, it grows that much more each next year. By your adding like the mills.
So for your recommendation for if we wanted to completely wipe off that, tax, I'm happy we didn't do the tax increase, but to really wipe that out in the future would be find revenue, consistent revenue coming in to wipe that out for the future of the 5-year projections, correct?
We need recurring revenue, correct?
Okay, thank you.
And that is I think one of the underlying initiatives of the recovery plan is that, a structurally balanced budget where recurring revenues match recurring expenses and you do not utilize one-time revenue sources or one-time funding sources, which is similar to what the district did in the prior years where we were borrowing to kind of balance our budgets. Those are one-time funding sources that we use that kind of got us into a little bit of the situation that caused us to go into financial recovery.
Tara,
And I think that I think that Director Borthwick brings up a good point, and this was a one-time look. So we do have, I think, Director Gilmartin, we have the forecast coming up where we're going to see how, this affects us going forward year after year, as you were just speaking about, Mr. Laffey, regarding the tax increase and how it's, it didn't pass, so it is lost. So I think they're good points by both Director Borthwick and Director McAndrew that they've brought up there. And I think we'll see that with the forecasting.
thank you. So are we ready to move on to our next agenda item then? We have Bree and Ian. If I don't know that you've been with this iteration of the board yet. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. My name is Ian Tyson. I'm a Director of Public Financial Management, Technical Assistance Provider to Scranton and other districts in recovery through the Department of Education. I'm on a train right now coming back from Washington, D.C., so I apologize if I cut out. So just let me know if I need to repeat anything, or Bree is also more than capable of stepping in and answering questions.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Brianna Unebu, and I am the Senior Analyst that's been working with Scranton School District for a couple of years now.
Thank you both. Whenever you're ready, if you would walk us through the adjusted 5-year projections, please.
Perfect. So I'm going to start us off on the second slide and just give a little bit of background before Bree dives into the updated projections. So as you all know, we came before the board in October and presented a projection with a couple of scenarios based on the preliminary budget that was adopted over the summer. In December, you adopted the final budget with some known adjustments that Pat and his team made along the way, along with a couple of other new pieces of information we've been able to incorporate into this new round of projections, including the new PSERS rates that were adopted by the Board of Trustees. So with that, we refreshed the projections with the flat tax rate for 2024, the changes in the budget, and then this new information. And with that, Bree is going to walk us through the new baseline and tax scenario.
Thanks, Ian. What I'm showing here is the updated baseline projection for the district, showing 4 years of projected finances. The yellow bars are the net operating result, and the blue bars are the total fund balance. And here we have the status quo projection. So that shows if the district does not take any corrective action, doesn't raise taxes in any of the projected years, and continues its current expenses into projected years. So you can see in the table below and in the graph that a negative net operating result begins to form in 2025. This is for a couple of reasons that I'll walk through. One of them is that previously ESSER funded expenses are now going into the general fund starting in 2025. So that's an increase there. There's also an increase in healthcare costs from the last time that we projected the budget for you all. So those increased healthcare costs are also captured in the projections now. And the third change is the increased staff hired to support the intermediate school schedule. So those staff are now included in the projections. Between 2024 and 2025, you do see total expenditures decrease by around 1 million. And that's partially due to ESSER expenditures that won't be retained. And also there's a budgetary reserve in 2024 that isn't in 2025. But after that initial dip, you do see expenditures begin to outpace revenue growth, and the net operating result decreases by between 1.4 and 5.6 million each year. This begins to draw down the total fund balance, and you see the negative total fund balance beginning in 2027, going down to negative 16 million in 2028. So this is the second scenario that we prepared for you all. This shows the same baseline projections, but now it's showing annual Act 1 index tax increases beginning in 2025. The Act 1 index is the highest allowable tax increase for each year. And so we're essentially showing highest allowable tax increases each year of the projections. So in this version of the projections, you can see that the district is able to manage expenses in 2025. But after that year, expenditures do begin to grow faster than revenues. And you see the net operating result begin to decrease by 1 to 2 million every year. This leads to a negative operating result in 2027, which grows to 1.5 million in 2028. That again draws down the total fund balance, and the 2028 total fund balance is about 8.9% of expenditures there. I'll pass it back to Ian to discuss the conclusions of these two scenarios.
Great. Thank you so much, Bree. So I think here we want to end on a positive note, like Dr. Carrera mentioned. The district's been able to do a lot of great work over the last several years. You've been able to balance your budgets. You've been able to invest in your buildings, restore programming, add back curriculum and other needed supports for students. And all that is very good. It's been a credit to you all as a district and a board for using this planning process to make those investments. Although the projections do show the structural deficit, I think there are some other circumstances out there that, would make me say that, this is manageable in the long run for all those reasons that Dr. Carrera and others mentioned. We know we have the uncertainty about state funding, so I think that the question there is the timing of when. When may you see those changes in funding and when can we incorporate those into the projections? We're here to work with you along the way and show you how that impacts those projections over time. But right now, what this is saying is that the longer that decision and those funds are held out there and that it takes time for those to come to Scranton, in the short run, you'll need to do a couple of different things. One is manage the budget in some of the ways that you've mentioned, whether that's looking for savings through staff turnover, taking a hard look at retirements between a given year, or deferring some cyclical investments, whether that's, Chromebook replacements or other things where, you can judge based on your available funds, the timing of when you want to make those investments. And then, two, you've also been able to work with some of your other partners and look for some of those longer term recurring savings. I know that you've been able to work with your third-party administrator, your health benefits consultant, and find some real creative ways to control growth in things like prescription costs over the past several years. So there are some tools that you have at your disposal to make sure that you can manage this budget in the short term while you wait for some of those longer term. A couple of different pressure points that we see there today. One of them being the recent increase in healthcare costs that came in the final budget. The other being charter school enrollment remains elevated compared to pre-pandemic trends. And then the third is that the needed investments in the buildings has increased with Dewey's updated feasibility study. So those timing of those investments will need to be taken into consideration when trying to plan through what does your operating budget look like over the next several years. With that, that brings us to the end of
Ian and Bree, thank you so much for that. I always come away from these presentations thinking we can do whatever we want to do. We just have to make choices, and we have to look at the goals we'd like to accomplish. We have to look at the things that are unavoidable, like those pressure points Ian just mentioned, the healthcare costs, the cyber tuition, the capital needs across our district. So I as much as these are difficult conversations to have, and certainly we'd all love to have every dollar at our fingertips that we could possibly need, I think this just shows us that we have to have those conversations, and we have to weigh the pros and cons of things we'd like to do against the very real costs and limited resources, and also the ongoing need, no matter how great those resources are, of being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars, and always keeping that expenditure control piece, which I think is the guiding principle of the recovery plan, in mind. Do any of my colleagues have any questions about the projections? Tara?
I actually have one. Did the projections that Ian and Bree that you were showing, did they include any increases in basic education funding, or maintaining the same that we're getting now? I'm sure you probably had it on there and I missed it.
I think we had it in the one of the appendix slides, but that's an excellent question. Right now, we're assuming like that pre-pandemic trend of about $180 million per year going through the formula. So if you add it up over the 4 years, it's probably a little bit less than $1 billion that get added through.
Okay, thank you. So even with some basic education funding included in there, am I understanding this right? We're still looking at a net operating result in 2028 of negative 1.5 million if we raise taxes to the Act 1 index? Or no, I can't. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct, Dr. Yanni. Yes.
So even if up until 2028, we raise taxes to the Act 1 index, and there's no changes to really our basic education formula, funding formula, we're still looking at a $1.5 million. Okay. Yeah, that's shocking.
In addition to, and again, Bree and Ian, I hope I don't overstep, but in addition to some assumptions made with the basic education and special education funding, there's also, as Ian mentioned at, I think, the last bullet point, we do have the feasibility study that's being prepared. We do know that our facilities we do need to continue to invest in them to update our buildings. There are some borrowings assumed that we're going to need. Bree, I believe it's 30 million in 2025 and maybe 30 million in 2027 to continue to restore our buildings and work with our capital improvement plan. That being said, this current budget cycle, the 23-24, the state budget did through Act 33 and Act 34 have some grant opportunities that we will be seeking. And if we're fortunate enough, some of them, the Commonwealth Financing Authority grant has a maximum grant award of about $5 million. So we could be, if we're fortunate enough to be eligible and be successful in some of our grant applications, potentially reduce some of the future borrowings in this next 5-year period, and thus, lower some of our expenses in the current year related to those principal and interest payments.
Yeah, Pat, that's an excellent point, and an excellent point about using those one-time grants for those one-time needs there. So that's a great way to think about how that impacts your long-term picture.
So I do have a question. I keep hearing 2025. Obviously, we're going to need to make some adjustments. The current projections were done based off of the current funding as it is, correct? The one at the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania ruled unconstitutional, correct? So my question is, it's already been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And from my understanding, the House has been told basically to come up with a different funding. So I understand that you're doing the numbers based off of something that has been deemed unconstitutional, thus forth not correct. Am I right? Anyone?
I was, I mean, again, I'm not sure who that question was posed to, but Director Holmes, yes, I believe the projections are obviously based off of the current 23-24 allocations from the state related to the Scranton School District. And as Ian had mentioned, an assumption that in the next future years that BEF would grow by about approximately 180 million in the BEF category and 35 million in the special education category. Certainly not to the levels of what the Basic Education Funding Commission deemed to be necessary, or the court system determining or has determined to be unconstitutional. But until I think some of that legislation is adopted and included in Governor Shapiro's proposal, and obviously then approved by the General Assembly, that's the methodology that is being presented, a more historic look at funding and not so much the potential of what it could look like in the next few years.
No, I understand that, Pat, and accept that. All I'm saying is that I
Yep.
understand what was just presented, but I also think everybody needs to keep in mind that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Again, if I've spoken, just like everyone else here, is numerous senators and representatives, and they have all said the exact same thing. It's not a matter of if, it's when. So this will change. It's not, again, once the Constitution, the Supreme Court has said it's unconstitutional, action has to be taken. That is not an option.
But
that is a requirement.
I do think we need to be careful about the word correct, though. Right and wrong, morally, ethically, we can certainly debate that. But I think, as Pat just said, these projections are based on a historical experience with basic education funding. So I don't think we can categorize the numbers as incorrect in terms of black and white numbers on a page. They are based on the facts as we know them today. That being said, our advocacy work needs to continue. I think we have a lot of reason to be hopeful and optimistic. And we certainly will talk through some of the findings of the Basic Education Funding Commission as our agenda comes to a close. But I think we have to keep in mind that we can only budget and we can only spend based on the facts as we know them in real time. Director Chesak, I see your hand up.
Thank you. So with that, I just wanted some clarification here to make sure I'm understanding everything correctly. So because the state of Pennsylvania has severely underfunded the Scranton School District for so long, what I'm hearing tonight is that if we do not put the burden on our taxpayers or make cuts to find savings that might impact the students or teachers of the district in a negative manner, we're going to be in financial receivership. Is that correct?
I think Dr. Saylor, Dr. Carrera, I don't know that I think there's a bit of a process there if I'm correct. That's my understanding.
I mean, that could be a reality. And I think we can all agree that Scranton is underfunded, right? And that, yes, it was found unconstitutional, the way our districts are funded. And again, I came from Philadelphia, so I understand what underfunding looks like as well. And the Basic Education Fund Committee, the Funding Commission, I'm sorry, have made those recommendations, and we're not clear on when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. But the expectation is that the General Assembly is going to look at these recommendations and come to an agreement on what recommendations are they going to implement, right? What is going, and so we don't know yet. Is it going to change? Probably yes, but we don't know what that's going to be. We really don't.
Thank you so much for that. My concern is that we're just to the point where we keep chiseling away at stuff and people are leaving, people are moving out of the city. And then that is causing more capacity in our schools. So then we're closing more schools and it's this vicious cycle. And the way I think of it as we should be building Scranton up, we should be making more educational opportunities. We should be bringing people here that want to be here, that want to grow old in this city. And instead, I think the taxes, the reductions, everything, it's driving people away. So I mean, I truly hope that this funding comes sooner rather than later because I don't know how much more Scranton can take. So.
And Director Fox, I see your hand up, and Director Chesak, I think those are excellent points. And I think they need to be directed to Governor Shapiro and to the members of the legislature because they are the ones who are making these decisions. It is Governor Shapiro who will take the first step in his budget and in correcting what has been ruled unconstitutional. But then it is up to the legislature to see that through. And I don't disagree with any of these concerns. And, you know, I think we have to take a multi-pronged approach to all of the issues that we face. And, you know, that may mean a little from here and a little from there and working together to move this forward. That doesn't mean that we can't keep up the pressure in the form of advocacy work to continue to convey the difficult choices with which we are faced in an effort to live up to our obligations locally while the state legislature is not doing the same. Director Fox.
Yes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
I appreciate, I did get on the meeting a little late this evening, due to my car. So here I am. So I apologize for missing the beginning. I want to thank everybody who's here and providing information with us this evening. The one thing I just want to make sure that we're also looking at is there are, I think, 500 school districts in Pennsylvania. As we know, we are part of the 100 lowest underfunded, which we were receiving the extra funds. And altogether in PA, there's been a handful of districts that went into recovery. So we're not the only ones to be underfunded. It is a travesty, and as has been acknowledged, it will be addressed. It will take some time. We know things don't change overnight, and we have to plan for what we have now and pray for what will come in the future. But what we also have to understand as elected officials, I believe, is that other districts are in the same boat as us, and we got into recovery in Scranton because of decisions made in the past and such. I've been on this board for 4 years, and I know in the very beginning, I'm thankful things are starting to change now, but people were afraid to give us money. They were afraid to help us because things were mismanaged. So we can 100% point the finger at the state, but we have to point the finger at the past elected officials and administrators and whomever and whatever we want to blame. But we have to understand is that we didn't manage things properly in Scranton. That's why we have buildings that are falling apart and need millions of dollars. That's why we had to put all money into the curriculum because it wasn't updated for so long. It falls on us too. And so now that we are here elected in 2024, we are still going to feel the burden of past decisions and such. And we just have to be realistic about that and be willing to do whatever we can to provide a good school district to our students and be realistic about what's in front of us, because just shoving the blame onto other people and not taking any of that burden onto ourselves won't get us anywhere, because we'll end up with a negative budget. So we have to put our boots on, see what's in front of us, and work together to figure out how do we get to that point. And that's why thank you so much for calling this meeting, Director Gilmartin. It's necessary. We need to see what's actually in front of us, because we need to plan now for 5 years down the road, not in 5 years, because that's why we're where we are. And the absolute last thing I would ever want to see is the school district that my children and my family members and my community members are in receivership. So I'm ready to listen, learn, and do whatever is necessary to get us into the place I know Scranton can be. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Director Holmes, I apologize. I think I missed your hand.
That's all right. I just have a question, and if someone could get back to me at a later date, be greatly appreciated. I guess my question is, number one, currently, I believe I've heard the statistic there are only 2 school districts that have come out of recovery or in the monitoring phase. Number one, I'd like to know if that's true, and the reason why I asked that question is, from what I've been told, and again, I don't know if this is accurate, historically, only 2 districts have ever come out of it and been placed into monitoring phase, which there is no plan. So my question is, how successful are we being set up to be? Because right now, what I see is we've been placed into a place, and I understand it. Financially, we have to do certain things. We have been, and our taxpayers have been paying the price for that. But again, I see the state putting us in a position right now where we didn't have a recovery officer, and we were guessing, having to contact the state to say, when are we getting one? And what is the recovery or the whatever phase we're in now? What does that look like? And from my understanding, we are literally flying the plane as we're building it. Again, that's not setting us up for success. I can comprehend, respect what everyone else is saying, and I believe the city has done and is doing the work required. But I also believe, again, where it's falling short is at the state level, who does need to support us in a better way. Again, I understand that we need to make the decisions here, but we're making the decisions based off of what's being placed in front of us.
So yeah, there are 2 districts that have exited recovery. York City School District and Scranton. We have a 3rd district that I'm not going to share their name, but are in the process as well. And the supports that PDE is giving the districts that are monitoring is a crow. And you're right, it took time for us to find the best crow for Scranton that could bring the experience. Dr. Saylor did work in York City School District as well, which was the other district that came out. And so we wanted to bring someone that could really lend their expertise in supporting the district. And as I mentioned before, PFM is a partner that PDE does support with state dollars to ensure that the district is receiving, the Crow's receiving support, the superintendent is receiving support, that there's ongoing communication regarding projections, regarding all of the models. And so that's the support as well that we're receiving. But to your point, and this is where BEF is really important, because, and I think this has been said a few times, this recent commission report, it's an important first step in recommending these changes, right? And any changes required, and I know we sound like a broken record, but they do require the General Assembly and Governor to work together and to agree to both future investments and changes to the formula. And so that even though we did see a slight increase for Scranton this year, I believe like about $7 million in BEF, Pat.
Yeah, approximately.
Mm-hmm. So, there's been some support, but, a lot of, I think we're all saying the same thing. We recognize that the General Assembly and the Governor have to work together to agree on what these future investments are going to look like for what, and I'm sorry, I don't have all the directors' names, but what the previous director just said, there are 100 million, they're the lowest performing, but there are 500 districts across the Commonwealth. And again, coming from Philadelphia, where we saw underfunded buildings and many things that I've seen as well, that I can understand the hard work that this team is doing.
Thank you, Dr. Carrera. Director McAndrew, I think your hand is up.
Yeah, I think what everybody's saying is 100% correct, but I think what we have to focus on right now is what's in our control. And I think what's in our control, number one, is how do we advocate and continue to advocate as a joint effort to get our fair funding. We know there's a big presidential election coming, and we know, the president's hometown is Scranton, PA, right? A lot of big leaders are going to be here. So when they're here, how do we get their ear? How do we become vocal? Also, how can we go to Harrisburg United and be vocal? Also, I think, how do we as a group look at new revenue streams to offset some of these taxes, things or projections down the road? Look at new ways to get money in here that we've never done before. And finally, savings, non-educational savings. So we don't, make any cuts educational wise. Why don't we look at, the operation of the districts? Is there ways that we can dive into that to see, hey, is there, a cheaper way to do this and stuff like that? They're the three things we can control as a district. But the louder we are, just like we know when we're on the stage and the speakers come and the emails come and the calls come, the squeaky wheel gets it done. We need to be that squeaky wheel, and we got to be relentless, and we got to keep going and going to Harrisburg. We have to be loud, but we have to do it together, united with a plan, because like you said, yes, everything's in our favor right now that the lawsuit, went our way and everything like that. But now what do we do? So I just think we need to come together, work on that, and control what we can't control until the funding comes.
Thank you. Director Merkel?
Yes, I want to echo what Sean said. I had the opportunity to be in Harrisburg last weekend for the Political Institute for PSEA, and I was very fortunate to speak with Senator Casey, and it was loud and clear across the state that we are all facing these cuts, and we have to advocate. Everybody can advocate, and the louder the numbers and the more we can advocate together, the better we're going to be. And yes, I did hear from York School District. We heard their story. So they were in we heard a lot from York School District. So they were in pretty bad shape. And there are other school districts, but the only way we can do it is to advocate. We have to reach out to, everybody has to advocate. There's nothing the matter with it. Simple phone calls, but we're their constituents. We have to let them know what this means for us and what it's doing to our children. And that's the important thing. We have to tell them our stories, the stories of what it's doing to our children. And that's what they need to hear. That's the only way the message is going to get there. And I've been advocating for a long time, and that's how we get our message across. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. Director Fox, you still have your hand up. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not.
No, sorry.
It's okay. No problem. Well, thank you. If there are no other questions on that piece of it, we can move on to the 2024 impacts. As we've looked at the 5-year projections and understand the implication of the decisions that have been made, I think we need to talk a little bit through how that impacts the reality of where we are today. But I also think we have an opportunity here to address some of the good news I believe we received today and what impact that may have on 2024 as well. Mr. Laffey?
Yeah, so we'll start off with the good news. Senator Flynn's office, Senator Flynn today announced that we will be receiving an additional $2 million in the form of our Ready to Learn block grant. Obviously, this was not something that was budgeted for or anticipated at the time of budget development. For those not familiar with the Ready to Learn block grant, the district currently, there's about approximately 20 allowable uses for the Ready to Learn block grant. We currently get approximately $7.8 million, and we use that now to fund our kindergarten program, our EL program, our vocational education, and some of our hybrid learning and our Apex program to support our cyber school. In the past, when we've received additional Ready to Learn dollars in the past, we've been able to help fund our school counselors in our advanced placement programs that are allowable uses of the Ready to Learn, but historically is budgeted with local and state dollars that are not restricted in its use. So by receiving this $2 million, we will be able to, again, fund these positions, most likely, again, school counselors and advanced placement, free up some of the general fund, local and unrestricted state dollars, and kind of create with that, have a little bit more flexibility and, use those in a manner that we feel to be, most important. we will be discussing this internally and also bringing some ideas to the board, but essentially it creates a somewhat budget surplus in 2024. As we know, if we were aware of this funding in December, it would have created additional excess revenues over expenses, and our budgetary reserve most likely would have grown by that approximate $2 million. So it's exciting. It's great news. We always appreciate the support that the senator and the representatives give the Scranton School District.
Thank you, Pat. And I think that's another important piece of advocacy work is acknowledging when things go our way. So certainly, I think we can all agree we're very grateful to Senator Flynn for his efforts in allocating these taxpayer funds for our use. It is so it's vital to the work that we're doing. I think it will allow a little bit more flexibility as we look at 2024. But I still do have some questions, Pat, about how where we stand today does impact some of our plans in the immediate term. I know one of the items in our budget and an issue we've discussed for a long time, and a goal of this board is reinstating that middle school schedule. I think it was referenced earlier in the discussion. And now that, despite the fact that we are happy to have this good news today, those are still one-time dollars, as you noted, and certainly fall into parameters of allowable uses. But now that we do have a bit of a I don't know, deficit, I guess, in our recurring revenue, how does that impact the plans for reinstating the middle school schedule? I understand there is a phased approach that is being proposed. I know that there are a couple of steps in this, in that we have the current MOU that will need to be extended with the SFT, but I would imagine that for the purposes of this discussion, we can assume that that will happen. And my understanding is that in year one, we are using the room that MOU has created and seeking to fill, is it 13 positions to deliver the curriculum, those courses that will fit into the room that's been created by adjusting the schedule. And are we in a position to sustain that at this point?
So, Director Gamar, you are correct. You basically hit it right on the head. It does require an extension of an MOU. We did budget for approximately 13 positions to restore the middle school schedule, to begin restoring the middle school schedule for the start of the 24-25 school year. The projections that Ian and Bree have prepared, I believe, do include that being fully restored over the course of the next five years. I think one of the things, if I heard you correctly, is in 2025 with the deficit, what does that mean if we begin to restore the program? What happens, right? And I think that's going to require further study. I talked to Mr. DeLuca today. I'm certainly not the schedule expert by any stretch of the imagination, but in year one, we would essentially be proposing to restore the related arts classes, maybe not as they were. We have some ideas on how we would like them to be, a presentation that Ms. Griebeck and Ms. Miller had previously given to the board. And maybe that starts with 7th and 8th grade, and then the current study period, which is being operated under with the MOU, remains for 5th and 6th until the 25-26 school year. I guess the question becomes is, if the funding isn't there in 2025 to continue to restore the programs with the second round of it, what does that look like? What does that happen? I spoke to Mr. DeLuca again this afternoon. We have some ideas, but it is going to require a little bit of a further study, but it's something that we're looking at.
Thank you. I certainly don't think this is, we don't have to have all of the answers this evening. We actually legally can't make any decisions tonight. So we certainly don't intend to do that. But I think it's important that we start to have these conversations, because as I said before, as I'm looking at the 5-year projections, I just see a menu of choices and understanding the ramifications of actions or inactions and the opposite result. And, you know, I just don't want to see anybody blindsided by these kinds of things when we think we're headed in one direction and then maybe realize we don't have the revenue to support it. But certainly going into the state budget season and being able to monitor that and understanding what potential exists, I think it allows us to have a full view of where we stand and what will be required for us to move forward, either incrementally or in a full way. Are there any questions about any of that? Then I think, Mr. Laffey, if you can just share with us a few highlights of the Basic Education Funding Commission report and what that would mean to Scranton.
Absolutely. So on January 11th, the Basic Education Funding Commission did make their recommendations. Their recommendations were to the governor, the General Assembly, and the State Board of Education. It contained about 8 bullet points. Obviously, one of them was reducing some of the volatility related to the BEF funding formula. Portions of it factor in on they see potentially a cliff related to some of the measurement data that is used that kind of goes into determining what a district share is. They wanted to calculate some adequacy targets for each school district. And the adequacy target is actually the gap, or an adequacy gap is the difference between what a school district is currently spending of expenditures for their weighted student population compared to that adequacy target. For the Scranton School District, it's approximately $5,000. The target was $13,704. And the number including report for the Scranton School District was we were spending approximately $8,889 per student. They talked about the need to for the governor to consider investment in school facilities, examine charter school funding, invest in student support services, and invest in education workforce development. The commission, the report supports an investment of $200 million per year into the new funding formula for the next 7 years. And in year one, investment of, in addition to the 200, an investment of 871.3 million to address some of those adequacy gaps. And again, I previously explained what that was. The tables that have been prepared and shown by the commission, the impact on the Scranton School District in year one, 24-25, if it was obviously approved, would be just shy of $17.8 million. $17,740,000. As we said, I think numerous times tonight, I think the first step is, the governor needs to introduce this plan for his 24-25 budget proposal. And then obviously the General Assembly would need to adopt it and fund it. And then the commission would like them to commit to fully funding the recommendations over the next 7 years. So certainly a large increase in year one for this Scranton School District if it was to be, again, introduced and supported and adopted by the General Assembly.
Thank you, Pat.
Welcome.
As I said before, I think that gives us a lot of reason to be hopeful and to be cautiously optimistic. It certainly seems that some action will be taken. I think we're all experienced enough to know that it's likely we won't shoot the moon here, but I think there are a lot of reasons to look up optimistically at these projections. And as everyone was talking and you were making your remarks as well, Pat, I was thinking it might be helpful to put some thoughts together about what we could do with that $17 million. What that would mean really in Scranton, whether it is holding the line on taxes, whether it's even reversing taxes. Taxes can always be clawed back. I think maybe creating a few points of what we might be able to accomplish, investments in buildings, growth of programs, things that we'd like to do for our athletics and our arts programs. I think that could be a really useful tool to all of us in that advocacy work that I think we've all pledged to do here tonight. I think sometimes, not only sharing that story of the sacrifices and the hardships we've faced and endured, but also what plans would we have if and when. So, maybe that's something I know you are sitting around with a lot of spare time looking for chores and things to do.
We'd be happy to prepare such a document. I think it would be a good, it would be a great tool, as you suggested.
Wonderful. Thank you. Are there any other questions, concerns, points for the good of the order? Well, Ian and Bree, thank you as always for sharing very clear and concise information. Dr. Saylor, thank you for your continued work with us and your support of our efforts and your good oversight. And Dr. Carrera, thank you for taking the time to come on this call this evening. I think it is really helpful, and I hope to Dr. Saylor as well to know that there is a team working alongside her, and I really appreciate your clarifying some of the different roles, and you have absolutely conveyed what I have believed is that PDE does want to see the Scranton School District succeed. And you are, well, you have to be careful and remind us of hard work at some time. I know that you're all in our corner, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Doctor.
Well, thank you very much. With that, I will adjourn the meeting if there are no objections.